Your home tells me you're good folk, just like us. One of the halves.
And your blue flowers tell me that you support the Purge.
Let me introduce us. We are some fine, young, very educated guys and gals. We've gotten gussied up in almost terrifying guises, ready to violate, annihilate, and cleanse our souls. But things took a turn. Our target escaped us, and several of your dear neighbors informed us that you have inexplicably given him sanctuary. Mr. and Mrs. The man you're sheltering is nothing but a dirty homeless pig. A grotesque menace to our just society who had the audacity to fight back, killing one of us when we attempted to execute him tonight. The pig doesn't know his place, and now he needs to be taught a lesson. You need to return him to us, alive, so that we may purge as we are entitled.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. Hello and welcome to The Fear of God, episode 89. We are here every week having a conversation about the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. And having that conversation is myself, Mr. Reed Lackey, and typically with me is my good longtime friend, one Mr. Nathan Rouse. But unfortunately, in March, he did not make it. He did not survive the night. He did not have a safe night. And so I actually do not know about the future of the Fear of God moving forward. So listeners, we need your help because we need you to go to iTunes if you listen to us through iTunes, and we need you to subscribe. We need you to write us give us a rating or review if you have not done so already. Go over and show some support. Hashtag RIP Rouse on the Facebook group, on the, we have the newly launched Facebook group, so I feel bad because just when things were ramping up, then my good longtime friend, I'm kind of inconsolable that he didn't survive the night. But, I had to get rid of him. I had no choice. I had to purge. I had, it was sanctioned. It was authorized. And so I will see you next week, ladies and gentlemen.
That is dark. I was unprepared
super dark,
for not just getting purged, but getting purged by you asshole. Wow.
Oh my gosh. And to be honest with you, listeners don't know this, just a little peek behind the curtain, all of that was just off the cuff, which probably means it wasn't that strong or that good, but I was just like...
Oh no, Reed, you're great. It was brilliant. I would never purge...
Shut up now, you really won't survive the night.
I would never purge you.
Oh my gosh.
It's funny, for a brief moment there, you were like, I went missing in March or whatever, and then you were encouraging listeners, as they should, to go rate, review, or subscribe. But before you said those words or invoked that language, I was like, did Reed just plan some sort of VR Fear of God game where listeners are going to track me across the globe or something? Like, Nathan's missing. Hey guys, hashtag where in the world is Nathan San Diego? I really thought we were going there. I was like, man, I'm on board. I'm going to be off the show for a couple of weeks, I guess. But, I'll send postcards and you can read them live on air.
A dramatically new format.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
We're our own version of a fictionalized docu podcast or something.
Yes, whatever that sub. We're creating new subgenres just left and right, just in real time.
Yeah. I think it's a subgenre.
Subgenre. So when we finally get past this last little bit of business that we have coming up here, we will be talking about the Blumhouse Productions.
The who?
We got it right
Who
this
house?
time. The Blumhouse. The Blumhouse Productions. It is written and directed by one Mr. James DeMonaco. The Purge. But before we get into all of that, and before we get into our usual frivolity, I'm so excited. We've gotten the results of the hashtag monsters, which we are not going to reveal to you right yet, but you can stay tuned in a few weeks for that. But it is time to reveal your bracket pairings, your bracket for our SummerSlam of Monsters. Stay tuned. Yes. So SummerSlam of Monsters, we are going to have our Monster Mash.
What just happened?
That was our jingle. You didn't hear it?
I mean, dude, you did it. That's so awesome.
So
all I knew was you just stopped talking, and I was like, "Reed, are you there?"
So what we're going to do is we're going to reveal to you who you voted as the pairings for the Monster Mash, the Fear of God Monster Mash in the humans category. Your favorite psycho humans. So I'm going to rattle all those off really, really quickly, and that survey will be up and available for you to vote.
Reed, do we get to vote in this? Can you and I vote in this?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely, we do. Of
now,
course we do.
Do we get to vote 10 times, or is it just one?
No. Every vote is just one per vote.
Okay.
Yes. So you
show
cannot
an
go
ID.
like what you did to tip the scales for it all those times ago.
Well, you said,
which I still don't.
I only
judge you
voted
for,
once. It's not like I voted multiple times. Well, my wife voted also, but
Oh, see, yeah,
it's
no,
one
I'm just
per
kidding.
household.
I'm totally teasing you. But no. So yes, we can vote. The listeners can vote. Everybody can vote.
I get my kids to vote.
Yeah, get your kids to vote. So I'll rattle this off really quickly, and then we'll get into some more fun stuff. But this is your voted on brackets for the Fear of God Monster Mash in the humans category. First up, this is a pairing that I kind of suspected because I thought these guys would be the most popular. So Norman Bates of Psycho is taking on Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs.
Did we specify, is it Freddie Highmore Norman Bates, or is it Psycho Norman Bates?
No, it is definitely Anthony Perkins Norman Bates. Yes.
So it's not Bates
it is...
Motel Norman Bates versus Red Dragon Hannibal Lecter.
No, not at all. No,
that'd be a really bad fight.
No, this is the Anthony Perkins of the original Psycho going up against the Hannibal Lecter of the Silence of the Lambs.
I just knew there were some audience members who would wonder, and I wanted.
Yes, it's true. It's
clarity.
True. So that's your first battle. Hannibal Lecter, he's a mad psychiatrist, but can he get into the mind of a real psycho? I don't know. Okay, so the second pairing is Jack Torrance from The Shining.
Nice.
Going up against John Doe from Seven, Kevin Spacey's character from Seven.
Oh.
That would be, I honestly don't know who would win that one. That's kind of freaky.
Yeah, you do.
That's kind of freaky. I don't know.
Jack is not going to make it out of that.
And so then this was my favorite in this particular category came early. This is my favorite in this category. One Miss Annie Wilkes of Misery.
All right. A little Lukey Lou.
Yes. Going up against the deadliest preacher we've ever talked about on the show, Harry Powell from The Night of the Hunter. Annie Wilkes versus Harry Powell.
I'd watch that movie. I
want to see that. I want to see it. Oh my gosh, that would be incredible. So then also next we have the Zodiac Killer from Zodiac taking on the Armitage family from Get Out. So
this is interesting.
I know, because the Zodiac Killer was never caught, so he's very elusive. Right. But can he get out from the Armitage family? That's what we're.
Or is the big twist going to be that Bradley Whitford's going to have been the Zodiac killer the whole time?
That would be terrifying. That would
and going to turn on his family, and it's going to be this like, gotcha.
I don't know. Well, and also, I don't know how this wound up, but listeners, also with your votes, and for those who don't know, like we basically paired these up with characters that got similar number of votes. That's who they're going up against for these brackets. But as it happened, two of our most sympathetic villains, if you could even call them villains, are pitting up against each other. So it's just like a tear fest all the way around. We're gonna take Seth Brundle of The Fly, and he's going up against Carrie White from Carrie. So it's going to be like the most tragic battle that you've ever seen. It's like a really depressing, scary film because we feel so much sympathy for both of those people. He's going
to try to barf on her.
I know, but
she's going to like.
But she's got telekinetic
like
powers.
Covered in pig blood and like set him on fire.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
That'd be a pretty. Happens. Now, if it's like, I just had this funny image of like. Beginning of movie Carrie White and beginning of movie Seth Brundle, like it's a meet cute. They're like, oh hi,
it's a sweet little. It's the beginnings of a romantic comedy.
You're probably a bit young for me, and she's like, I don't know, my dirty pillows.
Oh my gosh.
It's like there's that version of the fight, and then there's fully formed Brundlefly at the end, who's like barfing on everything, and he's got Jello hands, making Jello hands for people.
Oh my gosh!
Versus fully drenched pig blood, telekinetic Jean Grey level Dark Phoenix Carrie White. Like that is a fight.
No kidding. Well, listeners, whatever you envision for this matchup to be, who would survive? Who would win?
That's tough.
So yeah, that's a difficult. These are difficult. So the next one we have the Strangers of the also the film titled The Strangers, the Home Invaders, but they're going up against the Carnival Freaks from the 1932 movie, I believe it is, called Freaks. So that was an interesting pairing. That's
I have zero horses in that particular.
I know you've not seen either of those films.
Nope.
Yeah,
they are strange to me.
Oh, see, there you go.
Those freaks.
So the next one, I think we have two more. The next one is we've got Damien, the Antichrist-born child of the Omen, going against Herbert West, the Reanimator. So I do not know who's going to survive that one. And then the last two pairings that we have is and I don't think that you've seen at least one of these films. I don't think you may have seen either of them, but the final pairing is Henry from Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which is a terribly disturbing movie, going up against Jack the Ripper from Hell. So, so yeah, we'll see. Ladies and gentlemen, that survey is up on the feed right now, in the Facebook group, on the Facebook page, in the Twitter, in the Instagram. It's everywhere. So go
all the socials.
It's all the places. So go and vote and make your selection for who is going to move forward in the brackets. And next week we will announce for you the one I am extremely excited about, the winners or the brackets for the slashers category. But for this week, go and vote on the humans, and we'll reveal the results in a couple of weeks. So, so now that bit of business is out of the way, Nathan, I just got to know what you watching, what you reading, what you listening to.
That's good.
I appreciate that.
Good. Yeah.
There it is.
We should take that one on the road. It's a short song. We might need to flesh it out a little bit.
It was a little short. Yeah. It was a little short.
But I think there's a hit single somewhere in there.
For somebody.
Speaking of hit singles, so I have just it's a pairing here. So about 3 weeks ago, Donald Glover, aka Childish Gambino, dropped "This Is America." Roughly at the same time I started watching Atlanta season 2. So, man, he's one of those dudes who is so talented. You like, there's no point in being jealous. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're just like, yeah, you win. You've got it all. You know what's really funny, Reed? You just turned your head, and I was like, what on earth is on Reed's head?
I'm
Ladies and
surprised
gentlemen,
it's taken you this long
Reed Lackey Well, you haven't turned your head that much. Reed Lackey, my peer and friend, nigh on 2 decades. I threaten this a lot, but this may be the time I end our friendship. Like, you have Spock-shaped Vulcan headphones on.
I do. I do.
And I didn't notice until you literally just turned your head to bite a piece of food, which I also didn't know you had, and I wish you'd offered some. But I just didn't know. All of a sudden, I'm like, what on earth is wrong with Reed's head? Huh?
That's so funny. You're just showing the listeners all behind the curtain, like, oh, yeah.
I had to share. I had to share. You didn't, so I had to.
So, yeah.
Anyway,
I'm wearing Spock earbuds. Yeah. I am awesome. I don't care what
you are.
Say.
Awesome. No, I'm not making fun. I'm just I'm awestruck by the awesomeness. You are my friend. Or whatever the line is. So yeah, this is America. The video. If you haven't paid attention and don't know what I'm talking about, Childish Gambino is the musical nom de plume. Am I using that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
For Donald Glover. And he's released several albums, none of which I've listened to just because I just wasn't really that on top of it. I'm not quite that hip. But then This Is America released, and I watched the video first. The video is a staggering piece of artwork, and kind of can't stop listening to the song. So in addition to that, I would encourage anyone to watch Atlanta. Atlanta is great. And it's in a sea of 50-minute plus TV shows. It is an economical, concise 27, 28 minute, 30 minute kind of in and out, but packs a punch. Its first season is fantastic. I'm, I think, 2 or 3 into season 2. It's already, I don't know if season 2 has ended yet, but it's definitely close to ending if it hasn't already. And so I just sort of let them all build up, and now I'm watching that. So that's what I'm watching. That's what I'm listening to. Reed.
Nice. All right. Yeah. Kudos to you. I have not seen an episode of Atlanta, but I have heard the This Is America song, and it was just one of the most.
Did you watch the video?
I did. Oh yeah, that's how I engaged the material as I saw the video.
Gotcha.
And it is one of the most provocative and compelling 4.5 minutes of material that I've seen in a really long time.
It's crazy.
It's very interesting. There's a lot going on in that video. There's a lot of symbolism. Well, and
subtext. to compel you, if it ever hits the radar for you for Atlanta, the director, gosh, whose name eludes me right now, the director of the video is a routine, if not, I don't think it's every episode, but he directs many of the episodes of Atlanta.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right.
So similar kind of vibe and tone and flavor.
Gotcha.
Anyway, great stuff. What are you watching, reading, and listening to, Riri?
So I've finally taken a dive that my friends and most people who know my general affinities would wonder why it's taken me so long to get here. But it's been a few years, and Netflix has dropped multiple seasons, multiple series onto their stream of Marvel properties, specifically Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, The Defenders, and The Punisher. So I finally wanted to do a dive into this material, and if you look anywhere in like recommended viewing order, you're going to see whole seasons of stuff. They're going to say like,
or if you just talk to your dear friend,
exactly,
recommend things.
So it would be like, yeah, you watch Daredevil season 1, then Jessica Jones season 1, then Daredevil season 2, and so they go in this all sequence. But I was like, well, I kind of interested in all of these, but I'm so distanced from it, I didn't really have any spoilers in pocket, but I knew generally how audiences typically felt about each of the given seasons. Most people like Daredevil the best, and they responded pretty positively to Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, and nobody really likes Iron Fist and everything. And I will tell you that Iron Fist was the biggest driving force behind how I'm watching these, because I was like, I will get through probably, tons of material that I enjoy, and then by the time I get to Iron Fist, I'm going to get tired. And maybe it's not worth my time, but I want to kind of give it a better shot than that. So I'm watching these series on a scramble. I'm not watching them in order. What I'm watching them is I'm watching this is the sequence in which I watch every sort of round of this material. I watch 2 episodes of Daredevil, 2 episodes of Jessica Jones, an episode each of Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and The Punisher, and then every time I go 2 rounds in that category, I throw in an episode of Defenders. And the first thing that listeners and perhaps co-host would say is like, well, that's
a terrible idea. What?
No, yeah.
Oh, right.
But it's, for me, it's been fantastic.
Yeah?
Because, first of all, the first thing that people's minds might go to is like, well, you'll see things in those future seasons that don't make sense to you, or that you'll see, spoilers of things that don't make sense to you. But listeners do not know how comfortable and acquainted I am with a little show called Lost, where you would constantly see things that happened way far ahead.
I think listeners do know that, but carry on.
Maybe they do. But in Lost, you would, particularly in the latter seasons, you would constantly see things that would happen, and you'd go, huh. So eventually, that happens to that character, but we don't know why, or we don't know how they got into that situation. And I've had a very similar experience with the Marvel shows that take place after the fact. So, like, for instance, and I'm going to spoil a couple of things, but listeners, if you've seen all these shows, that's great. If you haven't seen these shows, then this isn't going to be too major of a spoiler because I'm not that deep into them. But, for instance, in Daredevil, I've met Claire, and the character of Claire, played by Rosario Dawson. Well, then when I finally popped in the first episode of Defenders, I was, pretty well acquainted with her from Daredevil. But then when she shows up in the Defenders, she is with Luke Cage. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Somewhere along the lines, they have met up or teamed up or something, started some kind of thing. That's
one kind of team up.
Hooked up is, I think, the term that I'm looking for. And then, at the same time that I'm watching that, Luke Cage is also doing a similar thing with Jessica Jones on her show. And so
sweet Christmas.
But here's what's interesting about it is that it is, for me, I feel more propulsive this way, because I never get too stagnant with any one character. I'm always anxious to get back to another character, and of the ones that are admittedly a little bit of a dud, like Iron Fist, I don't spend that long with him. I just spend an hour, and then I go right back into things that are kind of interesting, but I'm still sort of absorbing all of the material. So for me, I think it has actually been the best way I possibly could have watched these shows, because I'm continually interested. I have my favorites at the moment. Right now, I'm about 7 episodes into Daredevil and Jessica Jones and 3 episodes into each of the other series. I've only watched 1 Defenders, but my favorites would be Daredevil is number 1 with a bullet. I love Daredevil so much.
With a Billy Club, you mean?
Yeah, with a Billy Club. But giving it a real run for its money, especially in the emotional factor, is The Punisher. Have you watched The Punisher?
I have not.
The series?
So
I love The Punisher.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to hear. Like, I think I will honor and respect and applaud your intention, and that doesn't mean that's not a
backhanded compliment.
That's not a backhanded compliment. That's not a going around my elbow to get to scratch my butt. I do sincerely think that's an interesting approach, and I applaud your ingenuity. You are a genius.
Stop there. Don't say it.
Right.
Don't say it
I just think, what's the actor's name who plays Iron Fist?
I don't even know.
I don't even think he's watched Iron Fist. Like, it is so universally derided, which means you may actually find some value in it. But, like, I think if I would, again, if you have the time and bandwidth for it, go for it. But goodness gracious, like, I watched all of Defenders and semi-regretted watching all of Defenders. Daredevil 1 is magnificent.
I'm loving Daredevil 1. It's so good.
And presumably, by now, you've met Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. He is so freaking great.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. Yeah.
And you texted me, and I actually meant to watch that scene before we recorded, and you brought it up, like that hallway fight scene at the end of episode 2 of Daredevil 1.
Oh, it's incredible.
Staggering.
And I would say this to listeners, please hold your thought if you can. But I would say this to listeners, like listeners who are not interested in the time investment it would take to watch all of these series, but you want to know what all the praise is about Daredevil. I feel like Daredevil episodes 1 and 2 of season 1 kind of act as a 2-hour movie. There is some closure at the end of it. There's still some dangling threads, but there's a lot of closure to like a Daredevil origin story. There's a lot of closure to that in those first 2 episodes, and it's very emotionally satisfying. And I can say that definitively because when I watched these, right after finishing episode 2, I then went on to the other series and still felt very like when episode 3 of Daredevil started, it did feel almost like a sequel as opposed to like a next episode in a series. So yeah.
Well, and what listeners won't know, I don't think I've mentioned this before, like as a comic nerd of nigh on 30 years, I don't know why it happened. Daredevil's my jam. Like I adore that character. I have starting at about the year 2000, Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada did a now pretty infamous run on Daredevil called, it started the Marvel Knights line of comic books, but called Guardian Devil, which just I plugged in. I bought in hard to Daredevil. It was the first time I'd ever really read him. Have not, to my knowledge, more or less have not read an issue of Daredevil since then. So I adore the character, was extremely enthused when the series was coming, and am so happy that Daredevil is more or less considered the cream of the crop of all of the Netflix stuff.
I would agree.
I feel bad for the person who just said the same story I told but plugged Iron Fist in instead of, I feel terrible for that guy.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Anyway, but so you asked this question a second ago about Punisher, and you can speak to this a little bit. One, yes, I was exhausted. Like I completely skipped Iron Fist.
Yeah, of course.
And I like Iron Fist.
No, of course.
I like the character of Iron Fist. I completely skipped the series, and I did watch all of Defenders and was almost bored to tears, which is such a shame because those are really strong characters and good performers. So when Punisher started coming out, it was a twofold element that kept me from diving in. One was exhaustion. I wasn't ready or sure if I wanted to dive back into a 13 episode untested sort of show. The second one was, and again, this is what you can speak to, I'm not sure I wanted the indulgence factor of the level of violence attached to it, and I just don't know.
So I'm 3 episodes in, only 3 of 13. I have been surprised. So there are moments of intense violence, but I have seen every version of Punisher film that there is to, including the
Dolph
Lundgren one that is almost just embarrassing at this point, but it's still somehow in my mind better than the Thomas Jane one. Don't hate me, listeners, but so I've seen all of those versions of it, and yeah, they do sort of lean in on some violence. Here is what I was very surprised by, and why I would give a soft recommendation to Punisher, even with the concern that you just expressed. The violence has a lot of gravity. It's not gratuitous at all, at least in these first 3 episodes. In fact, the 3rd episode, which I just finished, concludes, like near the end of it, concludes with just almost, I will call it a rain of blood, if you want to call it that. And there's some context for it, but it is one of the most emotionally devastating sequences. It is not, let's revel in the nihilism of all this death. It is very much like it is aware of the gravity of the violence that it's toying with. And that's one of the things I've found most impressive about, at least where I'm at in the series. One of the things I've found most impressive about that is that I think John Bernthal is a perfect choice for the Punisher. I think he's perfect because there is a sensitivity to him, but at the same time, there is a deep-seated just a violence inherent to his character. But it's not that you're just like ready for him to go and bop heads. You sympathize deeply. That's what I'm looking for. It's like you sympathize deeply with what this guy is going through. And that he doesn't really, at least in this version, I don't know how he is in Daredevil season 2, which I know he shows up in, but in this version of it, in his own series, he doesn't really want this. Like he doesn't want to do this, but he can't really escape it. And I found that so interesting. And so then when he gets pulled into it, he is dang good at it. But he doesn't really it's not like, oh, I can't wait to do, it's like there is definitely a restraint that wants to be done with that life. And I was impressed. I would encourage maybe check out the first episode. And again, I was surprised, not to the level of excitement and thrill that I was season 2. I will say this. I have gone back and rewatched exactly 2 scenes in all of the episodes that I've watched so far. Before moving on, I have rewatched 2 scenes. One was the hallway fight scene at the end of episode 2, season 1 of Daredevil. The second one was this war-torn bloodbath at the end of episode 3 of Punisher. And I watched those 2 scenes because of how compelling they were for the story, because of how interesting they were for the story.
Well, and we can certainly move on from this. We haven't even started touching the actual content yet, but you hit on this, and I'm glad you did. When I actually Daredevil 2 is structured in a pretty interesting fashion, in a way that I think, or rather I wish more of the Marvel shows would take a cue from. It's kind of got some mini arcs to it.
Oh, okay, sure.
As opposed to one overarching sort of thing. So Punisher has kind of a mini arc. Elektra has kind of a mini arc, which kind of dovetail into each other. Regardless, I utterly agree with you. I think John Bernthal, it would take some work to figure out who would be better than him at that role. Like, he really nails. And I don't really love the guy as an actor, but he is so good as that character in a way that I don't know until he was announced as being cast as it that I would have thought about,
Yeah. Of course.
Anyway, well, yeah. I mean, there you go, Reed. You are. Yeah. I gotta admit, I kind of envy the way you're watching those, because it feels like, as the comic fan I am, it feels like your stack of comics that you're just going through. You're like, hey, I'm going to read Daredevil, and then after that, I'm going to read some Jessica Jones.
That's exactly.
I can dig on that, Reed.
Yeah, and that's exactly sort of the logic that I approach these with. Is I was like, okay, I don't need to read the entire arc of this one line before I start this other stack of comics. I'm just going to treat this in this.
I like you, Reed
fashion.
Likey.
I like you too. So that's how I am. I'll probably tag back in. I don't know how long it's going to take me, because it's 99 episodes to get through.
That's a lot of show.
So, but yeah, I'll tag back in periodically and let listeners know where I'm at.
Cool. Well, that's been another episode of What You Watching, What You Reading, What are you listening to? That was a long What You're Watching, Reading, Listening to. In actuality and the song. So yeah, this week we are discussing, you already named the director and writer, but it is the Blumhouse, not to be confused with Bloomhouse, which is the Bizarro World version of all of these movies. The Blumhouse Productions film starring Ethan Hawke, Lena Headey, and some kids, called The Purge.
Ethan Hawke, Lena Headey, and some kids.
Right. Oh, I had seen this film. It's not often I get to say that. I actually saw it in the theater. Because okay. I recall, Ethan Hawke is always a reasonably decent hook for me, which, by the way, and man, I'll be doggone if I can't remember the title. Is it called The First Reformed or The Last Reformed? He's in a film now.
Yeah, First
Reformed. That's getting like crazy good reviews that I really want to see.
I bet I want to see that too.
So Ethan Hawke is always a reasonable hook, which doesn't mean I see absolutely everything, but a reasonable hook, Ethan Hawke thriller. This was probably within enough proximity to Sinister that I was feeling riding that wave. And so I was like, yeah, I'll go see this. I liked it in the theater, that first viewing. And we'll get to some of this, even if conceptually it's a bit unsettling, but then did, kind of watch it for the rewatch. Now, personally, because of my unsettledness about the conceit, I have not moved into the sequel. So this is the only one of the series I've seen. Speak a little bit to your experience with this one specifically, and then kind of into the others as well.
Sure. So I saw this film when it came to video release, home release.
Beat ya.
Yeah, you sure did. But honestly, I was kind of disappointed because I found the premise to be a wonderfully intriguing idea. And I'll just go ahead and tip my hand, listeners. I don't like this film very much. It's funny because this is a film that I have seen more than most films I don't like. I've seen it 3 times now, and it's a film that I don't care for very much. So I don't like the film very much, even though I like a lot of things about it. There's some things that I forgive because I know there are restraints to just practical reasons. I'll get into those in maybe some trivial bits. But then I did, because it was about twice as lauded as the original was by pretty much everyone, both my friends who had seen it and critics. So I did go on and watch The Purge: Anarchy. The trailer had looked interesting, and I went on to see it, and I got to say, it is
that was the Purge MCU crossover, right?
What? Oh, you mean because Crossbones is in it? Okay,
yeah. He gets blown up. This is before he joins the strike team in Winter Soldier.
Yes, exactly. The Purge: Anarchy is a really good film. If there was any in the film, if there was any in the franchise thus far that I would more open-heartedly recommend to people to watch, it would be The Purge: Anarchy. Which, if you know the general concept of the franchise, you really don't have to have seen the first one to enjoy the second one. But then I went on from Anarchy into Election Year, and I feel like both of those films, although Anarchy is unquestionably in my mind the best of that trilogy, I feel like both of the sequels dive more deeply into what I find interesting about the concept. Mm-hmm. This film, I'll get into this just a little bit. I have a couple of problems with The Purge. With this film that we're actually talking about. The concept, for those who have just absolutely no knowledge of what I'm talking about, which is probably a very small amount of you, the concept is that in this sort of alt-world America, year 2022, the government of note called the New Founding Fathers have authorized one night a year, every March 22nd, they have authorized that for 12 hours, that one night, all crime is legal. Including, and they highlight this, including murder. All crime is legal for 12 hours, and then at the end of those 12 hours, you've got to stop. And then it's, you're subject to the norms.
Or you turn into a gremlin.
Yes, basically. And so, for those 12 hours, rescue teams, first responders are not available. You are on your own, essentially, for 12 hours, of which you can do what you see fit. So that is the premise, and I found that premise to be terribly intriguing and terribly frightening. But essentially, the first film is really, structurally, is just a home invasion film. That's really all it is.
Yeah.
And it is not that dissimilar from other home invasion films I have seen. It's just that the concept, the premise, props up the reason why people are invading this family's home. So that's one of the things that I just feel like the concept kind of let me down a little bit. Now, I have to give some credit because the director, who is also the writer, he created the whole thing. He was asked before, he was like, hey, why did you just keep this confined to a single house? Why didn't you send it out into the streets? And he's very open about the fact, he was like, we had like $2.7 million budget. We couldn't do a ton. And I don't have $2.7 million. But he's like, we had a limited budget. We had to keep things very confined. And he did say, he said, if we get to do a sequel, then the sequel will be much more akin to like John Carpenter's Escape from New York, where it takes it out into the streets and it's much broader in scope. And sure enough, that's what Anarchy is. Anarchy takes it out into the streets. It's why it's more interesting to me. So I kind of feel bad that that's a ding on the first film, but still, we have the film we have.
Right.
And I do think it is slightly a limitation that the film is what it is. That having been said, I think the performances are good. I think they're solid. But the other thing that I was bothered by is that they make a point to say like all crime is legal, but the only thing you really see or hear about is people murdering one another. So even and I remember thinking like with the concept,
Reed, what do you want?
Well, but here's the thing: is like with the concept of the Purge, it's like, well, where are the looters? Where are the thieves? Where are the people who are not
Where are the
interested
pot
in
smokers?
Yeah, where
They're just that's not a very interesting movie.
you see,
Dude, we're breaking the law. We're breaking the law.
oh my gosh, we've got a quick to the typewriter. We've got a sequel right here. It's the Purge 420, the Purge 420, and it's just. It's just three dudes sitting around going, oh man.
And in the background, like through their windows, you see all these murders keep happening. It's just their antics inside as they eat snacks.
And they just keep yelling out that, like, dude, you're harshing my mellow, man.
But there is this extremely compelling murder narrative happening outside their house.
Yes.
That's hilarious.
But the entire film is just them.
Right.
In their hot box.
Right.
Just,
yes.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
That's hysterical. The Purge 420 to the typewriter.
So again, a couple of those dings that I initially would dig in rather hard on, I would not. I have some understanding that okay, there's some practical limitations to this whole idea. But yeah, all of that to say, I think if viewers are left a little unsatisfied by the first film, I would highly recommend, if there's any interest whatsoever in the premise, to seek out The Purge Anarchy, because I think, yeah, it is definitely worth your time. It's a stronger film, and yeah, it's very interesting. Does some interesting things. So yeah.
All right, well,
What's
that
that?
was a good episode, Reed. Good talk.
So I think I've already sort of said any particular trivial bit that I had to give. I'll go into unless you have some stuff. I'll go into likes, dislikes.
No, how about?
So I do, as I mentioned before, I do like the performances in general. My primary context for Lena Headey is Game of Thrones, so
Sure.
it was interesting to see her. And of
You
course,
were like, shame. Shame.
but what's interesting is I had seen this before I saw Game of Thrones, but there's so much more of Game of Thrones that
Sure.
now rewatching it, I'm like, oh, Cersei Lannister is a lovable little housewife. And of course, Ethan Hawke is really fantastic. But I think one of the things that I really do appreciate, even just about this film, is how willing it is to commit to this notion that I don't know if you noticed this, but in the end credits, as the credits are rolling, you hear audio of people sort of the day after the Purge doing a debrief of like, oh
Sure.
yeah, what
Yep.
did you do? Oh, I stayed in my house. I
Smoked
stayed
a
locked
bowl.
up. And then some of them are like, and then one guy, this was really interesting because the diatribe or the sequence of little sound bites that it has, it ends on a man saying, I lost my two sons last night. And he said, I've given a lot to this country. I'm a veteran. I've given a lot to this country. This used to be my country. It's not anymore. And that's
Wow.
that's the note that it sort
I
of.
did not get that part.
Yeah, and that's the note that it sort of ends on. Because again, this is over credits, over the first minute and a half of credits. It's just all these little sound bites of people reacting to it. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention this in trivial bits, but I do think this is kind of clever. So the Purge takes place annually on March 22nd, which would mean that the day before the Purge is March 21st, or written down dates 3, 2, 1. Purge, which I thought was kind of clever, actually.
That is kind of clever.
But yeah, I do appreciate that the film kind of is aware, it's very aware, that what these people are engaging in, even though it is a society in which supposedly this purge has helped them to rid themselves of crime, rid themselves of all of this, upheaval that they have in their souls by getting to purge this one night per year. Even though the film has that in its premise, I feel like it's aware that that's not really good for them and that that's not a healthy way to operate in society. So I like that because it doesn't just feel utterly gratuitous. But again, I don't like that it is essentially at its root a home invasion film, and I don't really care for the fact that it just focuses so much on just the murder narratives as opposed to the wide other array of crime that could be possible, like smoking a bowl.
What's so funny is like listeners who aren't sure of us and our position on things are gonna be like, wait a minute, are these guys like totally into smoking weed? And I've never smoked weed in my life, just FYI.
No,
but
I
it's
can't
just
stand
funny.
it. No.
Oh, so you have? Is that
I've
what
never
you're saying?
smoked it. No, but I've had neighbors who
Are you
have.
sure?
No, I've had neighbors who have probably given me a contact high because they decided to light up every evening. So
March 22nd, Riri.
it took me almost a month to realize and to recognize, like, oh my, I thought we had skunks. I honestly thought we had skunks because I was like, what is this? I do not understand this smell. But yeah, so that's what that was. It was our neighbors.
Skunk called Mary Jane.
Ugh.
Yeah. I mean, I would echo most of your likes and or dislikes. I do think the concept is strong, even though I have some unsettledness about the concept. I wrote down, and this might be more themed than like dislike, but I said it's very much like the lottery. It's a system we all
very much
we all buy into. Sort of that acceptable loss idea. In the spirit of that, I mean, I do like Ethan Hawke a lot. I do like Lena Headey. I think he's from Parenthood, right? The kid.
Oh, Max. Yeah. Max is the actor's name. I don't know his character's name because I know him as Max, and he's Max in Parenthood as well. So,
I don't love either of the kids in this movie. I actually do like the sort of twist element of the film. You know, that the neighbors show up and dispatch.
Yes. I'm sorry.
What?
That is no. I was just gonna say that is a really clever narrative pivot. Like when listeners who haven't seen it and don't really care to see it on our recommendation, just basically our main characters get in utter peril from some outside savages, and then their neighbors come and basically do away with all the savages, and you're like, oh, the neighbors have come to rescue them, but it's because the neighbors want them for themselves. So
right.
Yeah, I thought that was clever.
So yeah, I mean, that's really it for kind of likes, dislikes for me. It's pretty brief. I mean, I do generally, it's funny hearing you talk about your taste for the film. I don't know, I mentioned last week with Creep how if someone was like, you know what, I'm kind of in the mood for a scary movie, I'd be like, ooh, let's watch Creep. I want to watch you watch Creep.
Right.
Like, I don't have any of those kind of feelings attached to The Purge. It's more like, yeah, that's a movie. It's it's got a couple of competent twists to it. Like, I mean, spoiler alert, I didn't see the death of Ethan Hawke coming whatsoever. So that's a big,
right.
kind of switch up. So we can jump right into scares and sort of traipse along like a weirdo with a mask dancing down a hallway into scares here. I do think the gang, which you just called the Savages, I wrote down the alt-right twits.
Wow.
I think they're pretty doggone creepy. I mean, I really
they
do.
are.
Like it's I applaud the costume designers of the world who like Ghostface Baby and Happy Death Day and then The Purge, those masks. I mean, like, to design a competently creepy mask is probably a feat unto itself.
Yeah.
And I do think, for me personally, those land. I mean, the kind of
I agree.
General aesthetic of that gang is pretty doggone creepy.
Yeah,
and
I think
honestly,
the film calls them the Freaks. I think at one point they're officially called the Freaks. But
I'm not gonna look up his name just because I don't feel like it. But like you referenced with Happy Death Day, the lead actress, I think the head of this gang, that's a good little actor. Like,
he's great.
He is creepy as crap.
Yes.
Now, I don't know that he will get many roles beyond that kind of character, but
his name is Reese Wakefield.
Thank you, Reed.
You're welcome. I'm here for
thoughtful.
You. I'm here for you.
The creepy dancing girl in the hallway, like she was weird. It was creepy.
Yes, indeed.
I've got written down Charlie getting discovered in the basement. Is Charlie the son? Yes. It's when he's hiding at the pool table or whatever.
Yes.
That's pretty creepy.
It's nerve-wracking. Yeah. Well, and I got to say, like, in terms of general scares, when the freaks finally do break into the house, and I did find it interesting. Maybe I ding on this film too hard because there's several interesting things about it. Because when the freaks show up, and the reason, again, for listeners who have not seen it, the reason that the freaks show up at the house of these the Sandin family is because there has been a man who has been running through the streets and has been desperately trying to escape the purge, and the son, Charlie, actually gives him sanctuary inside their home. And when Charlie lets this man into their home, then these freaks show up, and the freaks basically say, give us that guy, or we'll come in and we'll take all of you. And I thought it was interesting when Ethan Hawke, who sells security systems, like he that is his stock and trade, is he sells security systems,
and he's made a ton of money doing it because it protects people from the purge. At least ostensibly it does.
Well, exactly. And then when he finally confesses to his wife, "Hey, we can't. These security systems can't survive an all-out assault. Like they won't.
Right,
they'll basically keep you closed in. But if somebody really wants to get in, they will be able to get in." And I did think that was interesting because it was sort of substantiates the neighbors' frustrations at the end of the film. That he's made all this money off of them, and they basically are as exposed as they always have been, maybe with a little veneer of protection. So I thought that was interesting. One side note, that bloody stranger guy is in all three films.
Really?
Yeah, he shows up again. Mm-hmm.
But as the same character.
It's the same guy.
That's cool.
They don't reference the events of it. To my memory, they don't reference the events of the first film, but it is the same character played by the same actor. And he's
Are the sequels meant to be subsequent chronologically?
Yes. So they happen
cool.
in order. And this new one that they're making that is supposedly going to come out later this year, called The First Purge, is the only prequel to the franchise thus far. But the rest of them happen sequentially. Which, by the way, we haven't mentioned anything about that, but that stranger that Charlie lets in, like, I genuinely like, because you feel kind of devastated, and the film has gone a good ways to kind of make you feel pretty downcast and devastated. I mean, they've killed off Ethan Hawke, and now the neighbors have shown up, and the neighbors are about to single-handedly slaughter all of them. So that's distressing. And I liked, maybe even loved, that the one that comes to their rescue is that stranger that they gave sanctuary to. I did genuinely enjoy that narrative pivot. Thought that was really strong. So that's, there are some qualities to the film, and I think it's worth noting that it did launch a very successful franchise. So I don't think it's a worthless film. It's just one of those rare instances where the first installment in the franchise is likely the weakest. So it's just it just happens.
Well, now you got me intrigued, Riri.
Yeah, you definitely should see the second one. I think you don't have to watch it tonight because it's late and whatever.
Yeah,
but I would say when you find the interest in it and the availability, I think you would appreciate what the second one brings to the conversation. But yeah, and speaking of that, did you have any more specific scares or likes, dislikes before we dive right into?
No, I mean, a little bit like last week with Creep, I do think for me the biggest kind of scare of the film is just thematic in nature as well, and that's the conceit. As clever as I find it equally upsetting and troubling.
Yes. Yeah.
And some kind of I will bullet point a few theme ideas. I do have one more robust one, and you can feel, I won't dive necessarily whole hog into that, but just the bullet points, like what I wrote down is violence as patriotism. I mean, which, you could go a lot of places with.
All kinds of places, yeah.
I wrote down, what would you do to protect your family, with the following 4 words: it's not worth it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Like that scene when Ethan Hawke is just beating the crap out of the stranger or trying to tie him up.
Yes. Yes.
That is, and kudos to the film. I mean, it does indict him in that scene.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The film is not at all on board with that choice to hand over the strangers to the freaks.
Sure.
I think the film is intentional and decisive enough to let you, the audience, in on the fact that that's a wrong choice. I would even go so far as to say, like, a wrong moral choice for him to turn that guy over to the freaks. Yeah.
I I wrote down display the blue flowers, which is show your support for the purge. Like, honestly, it makes me think of the NFL controversies of our current moment. I wrote this down, and you may enjoy this. I wrote the purge as mega/meta commentary on horror movies.
Oh, okay.
In the film, it's their engagement of heinous activity that quote unquote purges them. For you people like you and I who indulge in horror movies, it's this kind of like outlet, this vent.
Yes,
like,
right.
This kind of cathartic thing. So I thought that was interesting. And I just wrote the quote, "The purge saved our country." That's a really troubling line. Yeah. But anyway, so I've got a kind of a robust idea too I want to engage, but I am curious, like, do you have any drive-bys? Do you have something real substantial?
Yeah. I don't know that mine's going to be terribly substantial in terms of, like, I don't know that there's going to be a ton of debate about it, but you mentioned earlier, and I think because the conversation that we had on it, which, by the way, listeners, if you haven't checked that out, go listen to our episode on the lottery, because that conversation was so imminent, it was almost impossible to view this film apart from the context of that story, which that story, and in our episode, we talked a lot about acceptable loss, and, we're fine kind of getting rid of these people because of the benefits it brings to us. And this film goes a slightly different direction, even though it deals with the same subject, not necessarily acceptable loss, but acceptable impulses. One of the things that I find really compelling about the film, or about the premise of the film, is that it validates the need for violence. Inherent in this conceit is this is a world in which these people have validated violence, that violence has a place, has a home in our lives and our souls, as it were. I think a couple of times I heard, or maybe I just imagined it, but I think a couple of times I heard people referred to the purge as a soul level kind of thing. We need to purge our souls, get this out, as it were. So that has been viewed as an acceptable impulse, as an acceptable way to treat other people. And one of the things in the film that they sort of skirt by, that future installments deal with much more directly, of, okay, is this an excuse for us to purge our violent tendencies, or is this a backdoor way to get rid of the poor, the needy, the sick, the people who can't defend themselves?
That's interesting you say that, because having not seen those movies, I thought about that in relation to the first one. I was like, this is what would happen on a meta civilization level.
Yes.
But the first film doesn't. Other than that the stranger is a black person, the film itself doesn't really touch that at all.
No, it doesn't. And again, the installments do dive more deeply into that and into the consequences of it. So for me, it made me think on a thematic level about this notion that there are things, not necessarily just violence, but that there are things that we kind of consider to be acceptable impulses we occasionally need to indulge. And that is a frightening and occasionally convicting thing to think about. I think that if we're not careful, it's really easy to think that because it is a thing we want to do, it is something that we should be allowed to do. I think that particularly, this is non-violence, but I find this particularly in the conversations around sexual behavior. Mm-hmm. Where, because it is something we want to do, then we should have the freedom to do it. And people say, we're not harming anyone. And then, without diving whole hog into this subject, now here we find ourselves in the #MeToo movement, right in the heart of it. Which is all about people who felt entitled to indulge impulses that very much did harm people. So again, it's perhaps a separate conversation to what we're talking about here, but what I'm scratching at is that just because we have a particular impulse does not mean that impulse is something we should indulge or something that we should allow to have free reign. Yes, you in the back raising your hand. Nathan Rouse.
Listeners don't know, I just raised my hand to address. So I don't want you to dismiss that too out of hand, though my thematic ideas don't address me too specifically. You're calling out the desire, the impulse idea does. And I think I'm going to invoke a word here that the Pentecostals in the audience will get on board with, and being as sort of understand that I don't embrace it. It is not an old friend to me, church language, the language a lot of sort of church folk will adopt, and that kind of muddies and doesn't make a ton of sense in a real practical way. So understand that I don't use this word lightly.
Okay.
I watched this movie, and the conceit so troubles me. And Reed, the word I kept coming back to was holiness. And I'm going to lamanize that with wholeness. And I thought, piggybacking on exactly, you thank you. You kind of threw the volleyball up in the air, and then I shot it into the net. You like that?
I do.
That was a play on my ignorance of sports, but I really knew I was mixing sports metaphors there.
True.
So I'm trying to make some sense of these thoughts, and the Fireball whiskey is having its effect.
Peek behind the curtain, everybody.
Yeah. So we're naturally going to have to exercise these feelings or impulses, that indulging. So the movie talks about the denial of our true self, right? Like right. To not purge is a denial of our true self. And that I'm incorporating this word here, that is what reforms us. That is what reshapes society.
Right.
So reform versus transform. Christ's love and death transforms us. Holiness. I can't get away. What troubles me so deeply about the conceit of this movie is, and you and I discussed this in brief before a week ago or whatever. So many movies I can watch, even the violent ones or the super scary ones, because the movie doesn't endorse the violence or the scare factor. It just sort of presents it. Hey, here's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. These are just these weirdos living out in the woods, and you just happen to fall into their spider's web. Oh, sucks for you. The world itself, that's not the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. People aren't meant to be sort of indicative or representative of the world writ large.
Sure. Right.
The Purge is, at least and especially the first film, is saying this is the world that we have created, and it has improved our world. Almost everyone gets on board with that idea. Yeah. And that's what deeply troubles me about this movie. And I am compelled and intrigued and interested to watch this, at least the first sequel, because I am so troubled by the knowledge that any damage to a person is right, good, correct, or decent of an action to perform.
Right.
Because as you just alluded to, given the right circumstances and permissions, the movie suggests we should be allowed to do whatever we want. And that in doing whatever we want, that will save us, kind of on a collective scale.
Right.
That anything else is a denial of our true self.
Sure. Right.
And what I kind of wrote down here, Reed, and again, I want you to jump in occasionally, but is maybe this type of thing is exactly what Christ meant in encouraging us to die to ourselves. And and we keep coming back to this phrase, and I love it, that the only acceptable loss is our own.
Yes.
If the most base instinct we have is on a certain, let's again use these highfalutin religious words, carnal, if the most base instinct we have, the most carnal version of us is our most quote unquote true self, it's not embracing that will save us, but crucifying it.
Yes.
This movie invites the conversation of what is legal versus what is right. It is legal. Hear me, brother. It is legal right now for the Secretary of Education to not dissuade schools and teachers from turning over immigrant students and parents to ICE. It's legal.
Okay. Yeah.
It's legal. But there is not a damn thing right, good, holy, or true about it. I feel like the life of faith is about learning to harmonize all that we are. all those competing interests, all those base impulses, taking those kind of really bad ones, if we can use that word. I don't love that word as it applies to us, but taking those base impulses, laying those at the foot of the cross to be incinerated by holy fire, and kind of harmonizing the rest, subjecting the rest to a Christ type of mind.
Right. Yes.
Because that's what freaks me out. Like, Reed, I get depressed watching this movie.
Sure.
Because because I know there are people in the world who watch this movie and agree with it. And that scares the doo-doo out of me.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there are, I think that's the really tragic thing about it. I'm tired, and I'm just going to say it. So as we're recording this, there was recently another shooting in Texas.
Sure.
And confession time here at the Fear of God. Confession time for Reed. When I first heard about it, my very first thought was, okay, well, I'll stay off social media for the next few days. Nathan?
Couldn't do that, could you?
No.
Okay.
That's not where I'm going.
Sure.
When I realized that was my first mother effing thought, and not, dear God, save us. Dear God, save those families.
Sure.
When I realized that my first thought was a reaction to the social media fallout and the conversational fallout, I felt ashamed. I felt ashamed of myself. I felt ashamed of us. I felt ashamed of our inability to deal with grief and deal with loss and to face this demon in the eyes and confront our own baser natures that have enabled this. And I realized and recognized that since I was 5 or 6 years old, I have watched a multitude of graphic, gory, violent horror films, but nothing in my life has desensitized me more to the loss of actual life than the perpetual and recurring loss of actual life and the ensuing fallout that is happening in our country.
Sure.
And I'm ashamed of myself that is the reality. And I am heartbroken that I don't have in this moment something better to offer to that. And that's why this film is so heavy.
Right.
Is because you reach a point, whether we like it or not, we reach a point where lip service is the best we can give to the tragedy that has befallen our country time and time again.
Well, I want to challenge that notion that I know what you're saying, but I would refuse the idea that lip service is the best we can give. I'd say lip service is what we have decided and chosen to settle for. This seems random, but as I've been mulling that exact same event, and it is interesting, I don't think it's unrelated. You know, we're talking about the Purge. I mean, it is about the execution of violence permissibly. And yes. I had this thought the other day, and occasionally I am prone to tweet my thoughts. But what I wrote is, and it was, I think, just yesterday, is one of the most dispiriting phenomena in culture right now is the refrain of, quote unquote, we just aren't good. We just aren't good. With little rhetorical or lived counterpoints to that notion. Exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Frighteningly to me, Reed Lackey, and it's becoming more revealed daily, is that the church has not only bought into that idea that, well, y'all, we're just not good. It hasn't just bought into that idea, but it is at the forefront of it. It is the vanguard of saying, you know what? We're just not good. And it is staggers me. It staggers me as someone who, call me crazy, but at some point I decided there might be something real to this person of Jesus. It staggers me, and that's me patting myself on the back a little bit, as much as it is saying praise be to God that some true revelation of what I think is the real Jesus occurred to me at some point in my life. Like, yeah. I am owning that and testifying to that. Like, but it staggers me that the church keeps crucifying Jesus and denying the resurrection by the way it engages the culture. Because friggin' A, man, like, this is why I wrote down the word holiness watching The Purge. Because I'm like, what does it take for us to recognize that there is a capacity we have given to us all we need for godliness? And we say, yeah, but I'd rather kill that person once a year, because that'll really exercise some of what I'm feeling.
Yeah,
like that's like we don't literally have a nationally sanctioned purge. You know what? I take it back. We do. We have an administration who says, no. Let's get rid of the immigrants. Let's make sure on a very public way that we get them out of here. We purge them from our site. Let's make sure that nationalist hate groups that perpetrate murder in Charlottesville, that the administration says, no, it's okay, y'all. Everybody's, we're just not good. Mm-hmm. And the church says, you know what? I think that's true. We're just not good. And the church doesn't, I'm about to drop the F-bomb. The church doesn't say, it's kind of true that we aren't good, but Jesus the Christ who rose from the dead is, and he gifts us with all we need to be able to be good in his example.
Yes.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't get why I can look at Paige Patterson, the head of the Southern Baptist Seminary, who tacitly endorses, and not just tacitly, but explicitly endorses on audio broadcasts in the 2000s. This isn't from the 1970s. That a woman who is abused by her husband ought to stay with that man. Like, not in the theoretical, but in the actual, to a woman, says, well, stay with him because in the staying with him, you might reveal the Lord to him, and she gets beat again.
Yeah, right.
Like, the church leads the way.
Mm-hmm. No, I know.
Walking right off the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
The church doesn't lead the way up onto the cross where it nails itself, because it itself is the only acceptable loss.
Right.
I don't know if we're just scared to say, do what's right, or if we're just unwilling to actually do it. You know what I mean? Like, I
think both. I think we are.
Sorry if I'm just getting all fired up. It's
the
fireball.
Don't
of
apologize.
The
Yes, exactly. Don't apologize.
The spirits and the spirit.
No, don't apologize. And I will say that we try very hard on this show to be mindful of opposing perspectives. We try to be respectful to those. And I do think that is always, to a degree, called for. But you and I think, are both kind of talking to the church. Not like, if there are non-believer listeners to this show. So non-believer listeners to this show, some of what we're saying really probably does not apply to you, because you have not accepted Christianity as a valid worldview or as an adopted worldview. But for those of you who do, if you tacitly endorse, this is what drives me up the wall, that we can sit comfortably in the death of those who would perpetrate evil acts and revel in it. And here's where that gets complicated, because when we would look at, they would say like, oh yeah, if we're all armed to the teeth, then the only people who will die will be the bad guys. I don't really buy that, but the very fact that you're okay with a bunch of bad guys dying, rather than the active operating system in which you navigate the world being the redemptive power that Christ shed his life's blood for at the cross to make sure that all who could come to the table would come to the table.
Right.
And it's the fact that we are okay with saying like, well, yeah, but they're the bad guys. Get rid of them. I mean, that's what this in the context of the film, to these individual people who are going and slaughtering these people, the people they're slaughtering are either worthless or the bad guys, the problem. I'm talking about the characters in this film. They are either worthless or the problem. And we, in our heart, have begun to feel that way about people. I'm not talking about a theoretical, what we could wind up. I'm talking about there are people who could listen to this show right now, in this moment, who hate entire groups of people enough that they think the world would be better without them. And that infuriates me. It infuriates me that fearfully and wonderfully made people who have the divine spark in them are treated as worthless or the problem, and that believers who purport to follow after Christ Jesus would view entire subsets of people as worth nothing more than to be wiped off the face of the planet. And that infuriates me. It absolutely infuriates me. If you would sit and you would think even for a glimmer of a second that some people are just better off gone, repent. In the name of Jesus, repent. I usually don't throw down that hard, but seriously, because I'm serious about that.
I can, you clearly so. I'm not just being dismissive there.
No.
And it's funny, this move to tie it into the events of the movie. I watched it this time, and dude, I do traffic with people who aren't like me and don't think like me, and I just choose not to get into those conversations, or most of these types of conversations. Even when they goad me, I'm like, well, I can't tell if you actually care about my thoughts or you're just trying to be a ding dong. But like, I watched this movie and I'm like, this is where we're at as a culture, where we are willfully entertaining the notions of doing to our public schools, our homes, away from homes for our littlest and most vulnerable, to do to the buildings they learn in what Ethan Hawke's family and the families of the world of the Purge have done to their homes. And I say, and I watch this and I think, like when I reference the people I traffic with and kind of work with, and they're like, so you don't have a gun? Like, no, I don't have a gun. Well, so, I mean, like, do you have like a baseball bat or something? Well, what happens if, like, what might come off as reckless and maybe is me trying to not let the systems of this world, the powers and what I would call principalities, win and take over and beat down the door of my spirit to say, you know what, I might need this. And you know what, we probably do need to fortify these schools with adamantium doors and vibranium bars on the windows. I'm like, right. Screw that, man. That is not the way of the kingdom. And I think, and this is where I just personally will often find myself at an impasse with a discussion partner or what have you, where there is so much activity on the part of the believer that is reactionary to the culture.
Right.
Versus, well, no, y'all, like, our job is to push back on the culture, not in a way that is meant to, in itself, destroy culture, but in a way that is meant to transform it. The Purge reforms a culture. Jesus transforms a culture. And I think the more we buy into the Purge, the less Jesus there is anywhere to be found. And I had this weird thought the other day, reading about this Southern Baptist guy. Do you know what I'm talking about at all? Have you seen
yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah.
And I thought this, I thought the church owes a friggin' apology to the world.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
What a weird statement to make, right? It feels weird to say that we talk such a big game when we're the ones who should be like, oh my God, you're right. We need to shut up and start just kind of ruminating and ultimately just sort of maybe be Jesus. Like maybe that's where our energy needs to be focused, not on propping up and reinforcing systems and power structures. Like, I don't know. I had this very real and palpable thought. The church owes an apology to the world.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know that's
no.
heavy.
I have two things. First of all, I want to dig into the church owes an apology to the world, and then I'm going to come back to something that you said just a second ago, and I actually I'm gonna reverse those. You made a statement a second ago, and you said the more you buy into the purge. I forget your exact wording, so I apologize.
Yeah, no, please.
But the more you buy into the purge, the less the kingdom of God resides in your heart. It was something along those lines. It's like the more you buy into the purge, the less
Jesus is there. Yeah.
The less Jesus is there. All right. This is the scripture that I had.
By the way, this is a really great conversation when occasionally I notice your Spock ears, and it's like, completely like messes with the gravity. It's all good.
Yeah, it's true. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 15. It's blunt and to the point. 1 John chapter 3 verse 15 says, "Anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer."
Wow.
And you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. That's scripture, and I'm not
right.
I mean, anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer, and no murderer has eternal life residing in him. Now, I'll flavor that to say that I know that there's a great many people who have committed murder, that there is still grace and power to be able to redeem them. That's not the point.
Right.
But it's like, I think as long as hatred resides there, I think we have to take a real reckoning that we have to question whether or not eternal life does. And the second thing that I was going to mention is the church owes an apology to the world. I reflect quite a bit on this for myself. I deeply believe in the church, the Big C church. I deeply believe in the body of Jesus, because that's my worldview. That's my operating system. That's my foundational faith and the way in which I navigate and understand the world. But one of the things that I deeply believe about it is I believe that the church has an imperative to lead the way in certain things. I've talked with you offline before about how I believe the church needs to be the one leading the way in the social justice conversation. I think that the church needs to be the one leading the way in financial stewardship. I think that the church needs to be the one leading the way in all of these things that people talk about would be good and right things. But one thing that we never talk about, because for some reason we're just not good at it, I think we don't think we need to do it. The church should be leading the way in repentance.
Yes.
The church should be leading the way in showing people how to own what you've done, and not to make excuses, and not to use Jesus as a cop-out, but instead to stare it in the face and to say, hey, this is the reality of who I am and of what I've done. It does not negate the power of the gospel, and there may be consequences attached to that.
Yes.
And I think sometimes there is such an ungodly need to protect the empirical sense of the church, to protect the power and influence that it has, that we won't dare openly and boldly repent. We won't dare we will acknowledge that there is grace, and trust me, I will be the first to say there is grace for anything and everybody.
Sure.
There is grace where sin abounded, grace abounded all the more. I will be the first to say that. But I think there is a detriment to our soul when we will say, okay, grace, 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 and then not come to terms with, Jesus, have mercy on me, I am a sinner.
Sure.
Like, when we bypass that and be like, but I'm good because I'm with Jesus. I'm in with the clique club. Like, that's fine. That's true. I acknowledge that. I affirm that. At the same time, you can't just use that to skip over the gravity of what you've done, or you'll never really accept that grace will be nothing to you. It will be moot to you.
Right.
Because its real power is not just about washing over what you've done. It's also the transformative power to not do it again. It's also the transformative ability in your life to be who God is calling and empowering you to be. And that's the part that we so frequently miss, is because we will believe like, okay, well, grace can take care of this problem or that problem. But no, it's also, you've got to lean in on the fact that you can't make it on your own. You can't be better or be good on your own. And that's where it gets to this idea of like, we're just not good. No, we're not, but we've come to think that that's okay.
Right.
That we've come to think that it's okay that we're just not good and that we're going to stay that way forever. And I don't think that it's up to us to make ourselves better. Let me be very clear about that. I don't think that it's just a matter of will where we can say, oh, we're going to just do better this time, because I do kind of buy into the fact that human beings kind of suck. And so it's one of those things where, like, I don't think it's just a matter of our will or intention that's going to muscle through this, but I think it does require looking and having that moment. The prophet Isaiah, when he stood in the presence of God, said, "Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips." And this was a prophet. I mean, like, it's one of those things where when he was in the story, when he was confronted with the sheer glory of God, his first exact impulse was repentance. And that repentance was met with transformative grace. It always was, to everybody that Jesus encountered.
But I think like your comment of grace, I think the essence of what you were trying to say there was, we just want to call on grace and kind of not do much else. I think there's a hard challenge and truth that was, I think, buried in what you were saying, and I want to try to bring it to the surface. We just won't do the work. Like,
no.
Reed, it is disgusting to me, and this is actually taking my radar taking my scope off the church for the moment and focusing on the world. It's disgusting to me, to see headlines like Charlie Rose considering a talk show for men who got victimized by the Me Too movement. Shut up. Stop talking. Go away. Like, we refuse to do the work. We have so drunk the Kool-Aid of our own glory that we say, oh God, oh man, I got caught in the thing. And sure, I guess the way you phrase it, it sounds pretty bad, but dadgummit. Well, and then call them literal, call them metaphorical, the handlers, the PR people, the devil on your shoulder whisper, but you're good. You're awesome. Or, you know what? You really are just, like, you just do whatever you want. And then we come back 3 months later and 5 months later and say, well, hey, you know what? Like, no, the work hasn't been done.
Yeah.
Whether it's a Charlie Rose, whether it's a Matt Lauer, whether it's a Paige Patterson, whether it's a Bill Hybels, the list goes on, and we are not immune.
No.
If anything, we may actually be more at risk, because we will paint over the devastating effects of our behavior with religious language.
Yes. Yeah, we will.
And can there be a deeper, a more formidable demon than that? Man, we are going off on the Purge, and you don't even like it.
No, but that's funny. Yeah, but I mean,
it's like midnight here, 12:15, and I'm like, I mean, we really we just keep.
Yeah, we keep bringing
stoking
up more stuff.
stoke the embers of each other's fire. It's like, keep going. No, you keep going. Okay, I'll keep going. Now it's your turn to keep going.
I know. Well, and we really should wind down, but I do think
we're just purging ourselves.
Yeah, that's it. We're just getting everything out. I do think that we have a serious reckoning that we need to give account for, and I think the more we can stand up and say, woe is me, I am, I love the sinner's prayer, and the sinner's prayer is not the Lord's prayer or the how it's been traditional. As I understand it, it's called the sinner's prayer, which is just simply, Jesus, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. And just repeating that over and over and over again. Jesus, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. I think that the more we come into understanding that as the Christian Orthodox position, as I understand it, apart from the grace of God, there is precious little that you would be able to do to control your own impulses, to produce and foster good in the world. And
Can I ask you a question? I know it's totally rude for me to jump in there, but,
no, you're okay.
This is you and I in dialogue. It's just you and I. It's
nobody else listening.
My
Yes.
dog is sitting right next to me.
Exactly.
This is what I'm talking about, though. Like you mentioned the sinner's prayer, and this is what's pinging in my spirit. Like, because hear me, by no means on either semantics or orthodox level would I think what you're saying is wrong. But I think this is what I'm struggling with, is that you didn't say this. I am extrapolating from this. We settle for we're just not good. Well, I'm a sinner. Mm-hmm. Like that's where we end. I feel like often. Yeah. Like, well, you know what? I'm just a sinner. So thus I'm going to be prone to just sort of, oh man, I did that thing again. Well, I am just a sinner. Like I feel like we don't collectively, corporately, communally, ecclesiastically, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
We don't push past, well, I'm just a sinner. Well, Paige Patterson, he's just a sinner saved by grace. Like, yes, on a certain metaphysical level, but there is a dimension to you in that position being just a sinner. Mm-hmm. That has profound and deep and far-reaching, for many chronologically far-reaching, numbers of persons far-reaching repercussions that the phrase, well, you know what, brother? I'm just a sinner. It doesn't work. It doesn't. Sure. And I know that's not what you're saying, but this is what I keep
understand.
Getting hung up on.
It's a valuable question.
And I think this is where, and I don't, there's probably some thinkers out there or whatever who would be good resources for me on this, but like, this is what I'm struggling with, that sense in which is again, not what you were saying, but this sense in which we settle for just being sinners and it lets us off the hook, which doesn't mean we aren't always and eternally present to and have at a moment's notice grace to envelop us. Mm-hmm. But it does mean, damn it, there is work.
Sure, of course.
That the phrase "I'm just a sinner" doesn't absolve us of, and I think that's where we end. Please.
No, I understand. Well, there's a couple of things that I think it plays at, because putting on my theological hat for a minute, and this episode's going to go a little longer. I'm okay with that.
Is it? I thought it's been a pretty brief conversation.
Right.
About very shallow things.
Putting on the theological hat for a second is salvation doesn't, in Christian theological understanding, salvation doesn't come by work. It doesn't come by anything you do. It's a free gift that God has given you. I think the difference in what you're saying, which I completely agree with, people just being okay with Jesus as a cop-out, basically, is I think there is a humility that comes when you confront and face your sin that is crucial to being able to be transformed by grace. Because I do think...
will you say that again?
Yeah. I think there's a humility that comes with accepting and facing your own sin and being somewhat broken by it. That if that is not present, if that humility is not present, then you won't be transformed by the grace that has been given to you. So in other words, I think there's a difference between somebody who shrugs and says, I'm just a sinner, and somebody who's like, Jesus, help.
Yeah,
I think there's a very different. The words are the same, but I think there is a very different tone to the shrug that says, "What are you gonna do?" And then introduce a bit of levity. But I think there's a difference between that, just like, oh yeah, we're just sinners. That's all we are, and that understanding of like, hey, if we don't get some otherworldly help here, it's all going to go down. Everything's going to go down. And I think that, I think about in this conversation the difference between the Pharisee and the publican that Jesus talked about. And the Pharisee standing up and saying, God, thank you that I'm not like them. Thank you that I don't, that I don't struggle with the same things that they do. And the publican sitting there beating on his chest saying, have mercy on me.
Sure. Yes.
And I think that's the distinction. If we're struggling with this, I think there's a difference between standing up and saying like, well, yeah, he did stuff. She did stuff, but it's not like them. It's not like,
right.
It wasn't that bad, like, we owe them something, right? Look at all the good work that they've done. We owe them. So, which getting to your work conversation about, that's what they lean on, because they say, well, this person has done so much good work. So because they've done so much good work, I mean, we can overlook what they've done, right? We can bypass this one thing that they've done, right? And it's like, that's not really how it works. That's not really how this whole formula comes into play. Is you are these things. You have a multitude of good things in you. You have a multitude of shameful things in you. That it's all there, and you need to come to terms with both. And you can't allow the shameful things to send you into a spiral of depression and self-flagellation and everything. You need to accept that there's a path out of it. It feels like you're burning for another question, but I want to give you an analogy that actually, in my preaching days, that I used to fall back on. I described it, and I don't know, maybe this is a bad analogy, but people seemed to latch onto it and to like it, and it has been helpful to me. There's a passage of scripture, I don't have it pulled up, where it says that as far as the east is from the west, that's how far I'll separate your sins from you. And it stuck to me at one point that east and west, in the context of the scripture, they were talking about places, but in the context of this, sort of how we read it, they're directions. East and west are opposite from each other. And as far as the east is from the west, that's how far it's going to go. So I want you to picture something visually with me. Picture that on one side, my left hand, just for visual's sake, my left hand is the worst a human being can possibly be. They do the worst possible thing. They are the worst, most despicable human being that you could possibly imagine. And on the right, on the other side of the spectrum, is the best a human being can possibly be. And this is the best they can do and the closest to heaven and closest to godliness and holiness that they're ever going to get. Well, as I understand it, is that somebody can be, because east and west are directions, somebody can be buttoned right up against the door of heaven, knocking right on the door, but if they turn towards the other way, they're headed the wrong way. Somebody could be knocking on the gates of hell, and the moment that they turn around, or repent, as we say, they are going the right way. And so, as I understand it, and as I have contextualized it, it's not so much about where you are as it is about where you're going. And so it's not so much about where you sit in the pocket at the moment, but what trajectory are you heading? And yes, you could have built an empire of value, but if you are moving in the other direction, then you need to stop. You need to repent. You need to turn back around. And if you are the most despicable or worst that it could possibly be, if you stop and turn around, there is hope. There is life. There's future for you. And that's how I contextualize this conversation.
Yes, and I think that is a valid read. And you are a valid read. And I think the struggles I have, and that are clearly bubbling over, like, the frog has jumped out of the pot, and the water is completely boiled over. And to make a distinction here, just for clarity's sake, when I was referencing doing the work, and you may have just piggybacked on the language or the semantics, but what I meant was not a works versus faith or works versus grace kind of idea, as in, hey, I helped the poor and I, taught the kids and I ran the VBS, whatever. That's not what I was referring to. What I'm referring to is when you are in a position of power, and now that may be power of the head of a household. That may be power of the head of an organization. That may be power of the head of a country. Like when you're in a position of power and you do so terrible a job, maybe even just one time, that has a massive effect, the work that I'm referring to is after that happens, now. And I think what scares me, and for some reason this is just really resonant of late to me. Honestly, I think it just has so much to do with the long tail of this Me Too movement that is now just plowing through the church in a way that is probably correct and right, and in the long run beneficial, is like you used this phrase a minute ago and you didn't mean it in this context, but I am going to take it and use it the way I want to in this moment. Well, I know where I'm going. It's that mentality that causes these scenarios to persist. Like, well, I know where I'm going, brother. I've got my ticket. And I think this
no.
I know you're not saying that.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
I totally know you're not saying that.
Okay, gotcha.
But I'm saying that is the mentality. It is, we are content to let Jesus have died for us.
Mm-hmm.
We are not content to do anything resembling the work he partook in that he also calls us to do.
Right.
Like we will reject it. And we'll say, well, you died for me, and that's enough for me. Mm-hmm. Now, is it enough for you cosmically, metaphysically, spiritually, in order to be able to access the table at a certain point in eternity? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Is it enough for those around you whom you may continue to have devastating impact on their life in harmful and negative ways? No, it probably isn't. And I do think those ripple effects matter. Anyway.
Yeah, and see that's whoa, yeah. Welcome to the fear of God, everybody. So I would say, because I think it's worth mentioning, I don't believe anybody who thinks that the work Christ, again from a Christian worldview, anybody who thinks that the work Christ did on the cross is nothing more than punching a ticket to get you into heaven, you have misappropriated the scriptures. It is all it takes to put you on the right path. But I think that path is, in other words, the thief at the cross who had nothing else he was going to do for society. It was enough for him.
Yep.
Paul, who when he was Saul, slaughtered and imprisoned countless believers. It was enough for him. And I think that what we must be cautious of is we must be cautious to recognize that the grace and the salvation that we have been offered, elsewhere in the scriptures it says, if we ignore this salvation, what hope do we have? Like how could we possibly ignore so great a salvation? I think it is a sticky, thin line to walk to understand that just because you may, let's go to what Jesus said in the Gospel of Matthew, where he said, there are people who will come to me and will say, we cast out demons in your name. We did all kinds of wonderful things in your name. And he looked at him and he said, I never knew you. I think that lip service is cheap. Words are cheap. Mm-hmm. You can say whatever you want to say. It's about what's happening in your heart. It's about what you've really accepted, which is if you've accepted, as I see it, if you've accepted a certain inability to save yourself, and if you've accepted the transformative work that Christ has freely offered to you, then yes, that will be enough. Will you still do heinous and terrible things? The reality is possibly.
Sure.
And
sure.
will that grace condone that? No, it won't condone it, but I think it still has the power to redeem it.
Sure. Yes.
And I think that will all depend on how you accept it. And if you look at it and say what I did didn't matter, I don't think you've accepted it. If you look at it and say, yeah, what I did didn't matter, you haven't really felt the full weight of it. Now, at the same time, I think that the enemy of our spirits could slide us into a severe amount of shame and self-degradation and destroy any potential redemption that is taking place in your heart by just making you beat yourself to a bloody pulp because you can't get past what you've done. And I don't think that's right either.
Sure.
I think so what I think it boils down to is getting back to the purge, because whoo boy. But I think what it boils down to is getting back to the purge is if you sit in a place where you can look at something that I think would break the heart of God and say, that's okay. You've got some serious reckoning to come to terms to. Like if there's something that you can look at and say like, well, this is just what we do.
Right.
The purge is just what we do. This is an acceptable impulse. This is an acceptable leeway that we give to ourselves, an acceptable place where we can sit in that pocket and just be wrong and evil and devastating and hate-filled. And when you sit there, then yeah, it is absolutely counteractive to eternity resting in your heart. And I do think that there's a serious deficiency that not only the church, but I think the world writ large, I think humanity has always suffered from powerful people being too prideful to really admit what they've done and accept that there is a third way that is available to them.
Well, yeah. Jesus, have mercy on us. And I think yes, would that, and Jesus assist Reed and I. Jesus assist people who are listening to this. Jesus assist the church writ large to have ambassadors, to have little Christs who are unwilling to simply say, well, I'm just a sinner, brother, or hey, I got my ticket, and are willing to say, hey, what did Christ do? What did he act like? How did he behave towards people? How can I emulate that? Mm-hmm. Anyway,
the Purge. We got a lot out of our system there,
man. So, we purged.
I am going to acknowledge. I'm not even going to apologize for it. I'm going to acknowledge that some people probably just showed up to hear what our thoughts are on the Purge, and then got all this sermonizing. And hopefully, this is kind of what you sign up for our
that
show. One
was kind of rare. That was
a bit rare for us, but I had a good conversation. And now let's bring in our deacon, David S. Pumpkins, and see how the Purge stacks up in general. So as we do on every film that we cover, we rate this in a unique metric of number of David S. Pumpkins. We're going to talk about its style, its scares, and its substance. I think even before we get into this film brought up a lot in us that maybe is not necessarily the film's fault. But in the area of style, I've made no bones about the fact that I don't totally care for this film. I think its premise is stronger than... we've pointed out a couple of things that I actually liked more than usual. So I was actually going to lean on like a 2, but with what we've said, I'm going to give it a 2.5 for style.
You are a little harsher to this one than I am. I'm going to give it a 3, though. I do think it's pretty middle of the road. I'll give it a 3.
All right. And what would you give it for scares?
I actually might lean 2.5 there. I think overall it's more just kind of thriller. It's not
sure.
It's got some kind of jumps, but nothing overly, harrowing.
Yeah, overwhelming or anything. I'm going to give it a 3 for scares. Because again, I think the scariest thing about it is just the premise. I don't think the actual interactions or anything are all that terribly scary. Now for substance, again, maybe my knowledge of the sequels, maybe what we've dived into here, and the fact that it sparked that, I don't know. But I'm going to lean a little heavier on substance, give it something, and I'm going to go a 4 for substance. My
impulse was to do a 5, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I think I will pull the punch a tiny bit and land at 4.5. I'm going to ding that half a point simply because the movie doesn't within itself engage the idea, but I think the notion of indulging destructive behaviors as a source of redemption is ripe, clearly. Yes. On a substance level. So I do think there's a lot there.
Absolutely, yeah.
So now the movie The Purge, on our David S. Pumpkins meter, we ranked a 6.5 out of 10 David S. Pumpkins. Now that is the movie. I would say the conversation we had on the movie The Purge, I'm going to give a 10 out of 10 David S. Holy cow, Reed?
Yeah,
Reed.
I was not ready for that.
Reed.
I was not really expecting that.
I was not either. I stepped into a different dimension. I don't know if I should apologize or say, how did it go?
No. Don't apologize, because the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it's not the end of the conversation. Like, this is... Like, we have...
I don't know. People probably want this conversation to end, so...
They probably do. But we explore these things. We don't necessarily explain them. I've done a ton more explaining in this episode than I'm really comfortable with or than I normally do. But this is an exploration. This is about exploring these intersections. We have deeply religious people of all walks of life that listen to our show, and we would love to hear your thoughts on any and all of what we've talked about, this notion of, and I think there's a lot more to it than theological rhetoric to be had. I think it's about how you navigate the world, what you do with what you know, and not harboring things in your heart that you would accept. Like hatred and eternity cannot reside in the same space. One will survive and one will not. And so yeah. So that's where I sit on that. And so I think we'd best just go ahead and leave it before we wind back up again.
No, really. Hey, let's talk about, this has been episode 4 of however many in the Blumhouse Productions series. Thank you for listening, if you are still there listening.
And if you are, we thank you very much for
yes. Show us grace as we explore over explaining. And guys, we will see you next week, hopefully with a little more concise episode. But who knows? Who knows? We didn't really expect this. So
that's true. True that. All right. So stay tuned to social media to see where we're going next in our hashtag Consider the Blums, and we will see you then. Bye-bye, everybody.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it is not the end of the conversation. To continue this conversation, you can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod. Visit us on Facebook to comment on one of our posts or to post there yourself. You can follow Reed on Twitter @ReedLackey. You can follow Nathan on Twitter @TheNathanRouse. Visit morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week.